Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we're now going to be diving into last night's Monday Night Football game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the New Orleans Saints, which saw the Chiefs, despite the score being 26-13, this felt like a lot more convincing of a win than the final scoreboard actually showed us. And the Chiefs, they've been having their struggles in the red zone this season, so that's really why this was more of a game than it should have been. It was a little bit reminiscent to me of the Saints' loss to the Eagles a handful of weeks ago, where the Eagles were just sort of getting in their own way. Now, that was more mispractice at coaching and, some turnovers there for them. This Chiefs situation felt a little bit different. I thought the Chiefs were more functional, but that being said, 2 of 7 in the red zone. They're now just 7 of 18 scoring touchdowns in the red zone this season. Now, that is good for 39%, which is the third worst mark in the NFL this season. Only the Miami Dolphins and New England Patriots are worse in the red zone through 5 weeks. So that part of it, definitely not ideal by any means for the Chiefs, but they were driving on the Saints the entire night, and that's why it felt so convincing. Even just the fact that they did reach the red zone 7 times is pretty impressive in its own right. They outgained the Saints 460-220, and their offense seemed to manage the loss of Rashee Rice pretty well, all things considered, where at my core, it's just a crazy thing to me where at my core, I understand there is coaching and stuff that goes on behind the scenes for the results of these plays to actually play out in real time. But I have such a hard time understanding how open the Chiefs always seem to have guys running over the middle of the field. And I get it. It's with Andy Reid being the play designer that he is. It's with Patrick Mahomes being able to actually deliver the passes on time and get these guys open. But it's still just crazy to me how even in a diminished Chiefs offense right now, where they are shorthanded 2 of their biggest offensive weapons in Isaiah Pacheco and Rashee Rice, and they still have the likes of Juju Smith-Schuster running free, or a Noah Gray, or Watson is the other tight end, not in this game, but they just always seem to have somebody open for them, and it's a crazy concept to me. And then when it's not having guys running wide open, it's Patrick Mahomes scrambling, running around guys and picking up big gains there. So just kind of crazy how the Chiefs offense, it just seems like they are able to surpass just about anything. Not to, give them overpraise, but I really don't even think that's what this is. It's crazy how much more nuanced they are than the rest of the NFL for the most part. But it feels like Travis Kelce might be back in terms of some more actual analysis. 9 receptions for 90 yards, I believe it was, in this game. 70 yards, excuse me. And, my theory early on in the season and entering the year is that Travis Kelce was going to coast a little bit more throughout the regular season. I thought that's what we saw a little bit down the second half of last year. Now, yeah, there are moments where he looks older, absolutely. But I also think that he just sort of understands the moments and he arrives for those moments. And Rashee Rice was just developing into a legitimate go-to wide receiver on just about an every down basis. And now that he's out, somebody needs to step up, and Kelce was able to do so. You get a good, big game as well from Juju Smith-Schuster, 7 receptions, 430 yards. Those 130 yards might be more than he had playing for the Patriots basically his entire time there in New England. He had one tough moment, I suppose, on that red zone interception where he had the ball sort of jarred loose from him, popped up, fell into the hands of that defensive lineman that the Saints have, excuse me for not being, super familiar with him all, headed into this game, but Kalen Saunders, I believe, Kalen? I think Kalen Saunders, with the interception that he had there, was absolutely, electric. The run back that he had, actually, usually I hate almost any time a player returns an interception out of the end zone. He got himself positive yardage as well, 30, 35 yards downfield, holding the ball high and tight. Was very fun to see there. But, all things considered, it was a very good game from the Chiefs offense. And then you also saw Kareem Hunt, who was able to really assert himself as the running back one. It seemed like things were turning that way after the steal fumble last week against the Chargers. In this game, Hunt, 27 carries, 102 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, he just seems to be their go-to guy now. And their run game really hasn't taken all that much of a decline since Pacheco, left with injury a few weeks ago at the end of that Bengals game. But it does make sense with, a lot of people, there were at least some people on ESPN earlier criticizing the offensive line play for the Chiefs, which I can understand to some degree. I mean, you saw them switching around a little bit. I think it was because of an injury to left tackle Wanya Morris that, Kingsley Suamataia stepped in for a brief bit there. But, haven't had a ton of stability at the tackle positions on either side these past couple of years, so I do understand the concerns there. But if you're looking at the run game here and being able to have something to lean on, I mean, the big three in the middle of that offensive line, they can move players, and it kind of makes it easy for whoever is going to line up in the backfield, where you saw what Pacheco does best in the NFL is just downhill running, sort of fast-paced strength up the middle. And that kind of plays perfectly into what the Chiefs try and do. That's all they're asking of Steele and Hunt, to be able to just step into that role. And I think they're fulfilling it very well for the most part. Now, that's the Chiefs here. They're 5-0. We understand what this is for them. They're just going to keep, winning games, pulling them out, and they're going to be in the playoffs. So really, not much to be concerned there with the Chiefs. On the Saints side of this, magic clearly seems to have worn off for Derek Carr after what was an incredible 2-week stretch there at the beginning of the year. It just has not looked the same since then. And Carr in this game, it was just such a strange performance from him based off of his approach where, the Chiefs were bringing pressure. The Saints are currently dealing with injuries to two of their, top offensive linemen in McCoy and in Ruiz to, man that center and guard spot. But the Chiefs just sending pressure. And Derek Carr, I understand there were a couple opportunities. There was that one deep shot that he threw to Mason Tipton late in the game that might have been the play that Carr ended up getting hurt on. But in those instances, just letting it fly because you have to, I understand that. But even from the first drive of the game, you see Carr throw that terrible interception, and it's with pressure kind of closing in on him, but really still not even within arm's reach. And he's just sort of fading away off that back foot, just trying to float it into a receiver downfield in Rashid Shaheed. And I understand, we saw Shaheed, be able to get behind the defense for that deep shot touchdown that they did score. But ultimately, I just don't think that that's at all a smart form of playing football. And throughout the night, Carr just kept taking these leaning shots downfield, and I really didn't understand it whatsoever. And again, when I say the magic is worn off, it's, really not all that magical to consider what's actually happening with the Saints right now. And that is partially in the fact that they're without two of their top offensive linemen. The run game hasn't been quite as effective. It hasn't been bad. Kamara's still been great up to this point in the season. But, I'm not holding it against him that he was ineffective last night. But just saying the run game hasn't been quite as dominant as it was in the first couple weeks of the season against the Panthers and the Cowboys, two teams that I do very much think that you can run against. And then it's more on Derek Carr, and that's where you sort of get those weird, erratic Derek Carr moments that just don't look great on film, all things considered. And Part of it as well is the fact that I don't think the Saints are extremely talented in terms of pass catchers. Chris Olave is a beast, of course, but, in this game, Trent McDuffie on the other side, who I want to give some flowers to because he was incredible in this game. This is somebody who was all-pro at the nickelback position last year and has sort of moved back to the outside, has taken on number one wide receivers up to this point in the season, and has done a very good job for himself. So McDuffie, one of the young rising stars out of secondary players across the NFL. So he's able to neutralize Olave for the most part, who has 10 catches for just 10 yards. And then really outside of that, what else do the Saints really have from a receiving standpoint? Now, like I mentioned, Rashid Shaheed, you're talking about 3 touchdowns this year of at least 40 yards. He is somebody who can be extremely dangerous if he gets behind opposing defenses, and he's had some pretty good games. He, I think, had 8 catches for 80 yards, something along those lines in the game against the Falcons just last week. It was... 8 catches, 83 yards in that Falcons game. So it's not like he's ineffective by any means, but he's, I would say, largely right now dependent on that big play potential. Still a lot of room to grow in terms of being a little bit more of an intermediate guy, which is totally fine. This is somebody who came into the league as a punt returner, wasn't really seen to have a huge upside from a wide receiver standpoint. And I think that, him being such a focal point of the offense isn't a bad thing by any means, but I don't think that he's a legitimate number 2 wide receiver. And then you have Kamara, who is, a good receiving back and can do damage for you. He ended up being the second leading receiver for the Saints last night, but it's also not like they're, super heavily leaning into the idea of splitting him out and having him do damage there, where I think that he is a lot more so just sort of a running back who can make plays for you coming out of the backfield, which is, he got some check down opportunities late in the game when Haener came in, so those sort of inflated his stats a little bit. And again, Kamara, he's a great player, but he's not a receiver. He's a running back, and the Saints are pretty clearly in need of having another reliable pass catcher, because when you are looking to Mason Tipton for the biggest moments of the game, no disrespect to him by any means, but probably not a great sign. Would have been an unbelievable catch the way that he had to track that and sort of fade off to the left there, but a play that you would prefer to have going to, frankly, a more established wide receiver in the league. But let me know what your thoughts are on the comment section in this one. Again, I think pretty convincing for the Saints, all things considered. For the Chiefs, that is pretty convincing. For the Saints, they play in the NFC South, which at this point, I don't know if any one of those teams are good. But I want to sort of further expand on that concept as we're going to be looking across the NFL and talking about some of the biggest losses from Week 5. And on a scale from 1 to 10, rank how panicked these teams should be following these losses. And we are going to be breaking out the panic meter scale, something that we do on a weekly basis here at the GSMC Sports Podcast. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. So do not go anywhere. We will be right back.